Hello, welcome everyone. We are waiting some minutes before we start. There are a lot of people entering, so welcome, welcome. Great, so thank you all. Welcome, so everyone, to our active ownership and litigation session about what investors can do to protect nature reserves. My name is Liliana Mans, and I am Director of Community in the Impact, for the ones that don't know me yet. And during the past 2 years, we have held space in the Impact to discuss and learn more about climate change and also about specific initiatives that we found interesting for our community. So we invited, for example, John Foley from Project Drawdown, Enric Sala, founder of Pristine Seas, and Christian Reichberger, founder and CEO of Dynamic Planet, among others. And today we have the pleasure to have great speakers to continue deepening in key areas like nature reserves. So this session emerged from Marcos Kelson's idea, member of the Impact, and today also the Executive Director of the Institute for Culture, Communication and Impact, who is very involved and active in the climate sector in Brazil, and who will share more about today's session and also will introduce our great speakers. So thank you, Marco, for your time, commitment to this topic, and also to support shaping this session. But before I opening the floor to Marco, I will share briefly the agenda and some important logistics. So this is a 75-minute session, and we will spend the next 45 minutes with our two invites. And after that, we will have some time to respond questions from you all. So please feel free to ask questions through the Q&A function that you have in your Zoom. And also, if there are too many questions, we also will ask our invites to respond to some of them also in the Q&A function. So please feel free to ask questions during the whole presentation from our two invites. So we also thank our close friends organizations like Lat Impacto, Amazon Coalition, CSP, CREO, and others who extended this invitation to their members. This is a relevant topic, and we are committed to work collectively in order to leverage efforts. So now I pass the mic to Marco, who will give you more context about the session and introduce our invites. So Marco, please, the mic is yours.
Thank you, Lily. Hi, everyone. It's great to see you all. I'm very excited for today's sessions. We have amazing speakers talking about a very important topic, and hopefully we will acquire knowledge upon which we can take action and create positive impact. So the objective of the session today is first to gain greater comprehension of the importance of natural biomes, especially the Amazon, to global climate stability, and how we as investors and active citizens can act to increase the protection of such biomes. We have two incredible speakers with us today. First, I'm very honored to introduce Professor Carlos Nobre. Professor Nobre has a resume so extensive that it would take the whole session to properly introduce him. So I'll just post his credentials on the chat and point out that he's a Brazilian Earth system scientist, one of the world's leading experts on deforestation and its effects on climate change and the Amazon biome. He holds a PhD in meteorology from MIT, has authored or co-authored more than 200 scientific publications, has held top positions in Brazilian government, and as the co-author of the 4th IPCC report, was awarded the Nobel Peace Prize in 2007. In his unfortunately very brief 30-minute presentation, Professor Nobre will share with us the science behind deforestation and biome degradation's impact on climate change, the relevance of the Amazon biome, and point to some possible solutions in these issues. We also have the honor to have Caroline Prolo here with us today, who besides being a good friend, is a lawyer with extensive experience on global and national climate policy, international climate negotiations, carbon markets, and climate litigation. Carol has had senior roles in major Brazilian law firms, advises underdeveloped climate vulnerable countries in international negotiations, and is a consultant at the International Institute for Environment and Development. Carol is also head of climate stewardship at a Brazilian investment firm that actively engages with companies that are big climate offenders. In her presentation, Caroline will bring us important insights on how big companies' operations affect the Amazon biome. She'll also make interesting connections with public policies being adopted in underdeveloped countries, how climate litigation is evolving, and how we as investors can take action on these fronts. So with that, I'll pass it on to Professor Carlos Nobre.
Good morning, good afternoon, good evening to all of you. Thank you very much, Marco, for the opportunity to show some of what science says about biomes, threats, and opportunities. And I will focus mostly in the Amazon biome. I've been doing work for more than 40 years with respect to the Amazon forest, climate change, and its impact on the Amazon forest. Let me start just showing how important all biomes in the planet are for combating the climate emergency. Out of all the emissions of carbon dioxide, CO2 emissions, mostly something like close to 70% fossil fuel emissions, and 23% is agricultural emissions. So all the forests in the planet, they remove between 30 and 33% of all carbon dioxide. If not for this ecosystem service, probably we would have a much warmer planet today, perhaps between 1.5 and 2 degrees warm, compared to, let's say, 1850 to 1900. So just to give you, this is a very important ecosystem service of all forests in the planet. And this is also related to the fact that when there is more carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, that induces more larger photosynthesis, so more removal of carbon dioxide by all the plants in the planet. So this is a very important ecosystem service. However, the deforestation, which is mostly tropical forests, for many decades, that represents something like 12 to 14% of emissions of greenhouse gases, mostly, almost totally carbon dioxide. This is deforestation and the degradation. So also, of course, we have to think about that, combating the emissions, but also one might say, well, but this is only 12, 14%, 70% is energy related, fossil fuel combustions to generate energy, mostly to generate energy. And however, as I said, I mean, maintaining the effectiveness of all biomes on the planet is absolutely essential. And so, yes, no questions that to combat the climate emergency, we need really to make a transition in the energy system. You recall recently at COP28 in Dubai, for the first time, this is 28 COPs, the first time on the report, the final report, the word fossil fuel appear. Although during that COP, I was there, I attended that COP, still they say transition away from fossil fuel emissions. However, the COP did not really say how gradual this sector, the energy sector, expects the transition away to take place. Therefore, one has to be very, very careful. And I will say a little bit more in a few minutes about the Amazon. But yes, I mean, there is, particularly in the global forests, particularly the tropical forests, the global forests, there is increasing degradation. So that deforestation degradation, so that reduces not only the removal of carbon dioxide, but also increases emissions. So this is what science really is saying a lot. We may say, is energy transition the only way to solve the problem, to combat the climate emergency? And the answer is no, because as I said, it's absolutely essential to move very fast towards renewable energy. But I think we have to find solutions which is maintaining all biomes, and in fact, increasing tremendously the removal of carbon dioxide by vegetation, biome restoration all over the planet. I will say a little bit more about the Amazon. So that's the challenge. Yes, energy transition, absolutely necessary. And just I mentioned a few numbers. The Paris Agreement, reiterated during COP26 in Glasgow, Scotland, 2021, made it very clear that we have to do everything to maintain the global warming less than 1.5 degrees Celsius. And to do it, we have to ideally, and that's what the COP26 made it very clear, we would have to reduce global emissions by 43% by 2030. That was 2021. So in 8 years, we should reduce emissions by 43%, and then absolutely get to net zero emissions by 2050, by mid of the century, even before. And however, we are entering 2024, and 2022 had the record-breaking emissions. 2023, the estimates are indicating higher emissions than 2022, and all data indicates 2024 will even be higher emissions, mostly energy. Use of fossil fuels is increasing globally. Very, very few countries are reducing and moving towards renewable energy. So we are really moving in a very difficult way. And so that's why I would say, number one, energy transition is very important. There is no way, but we need more. It's not the only way to solve the problem. The other thing, as I said, land forests, tropical forests, they were highly deforested, mostly Southeast Asia tropical forests, equatorial Africa, but also the Amazon. The Amazon has the largest tropical forest in the planet, originally close to 7 million square kilometers. Now we have seen something like 30, altogether, it's about 17% of the Amazon forest has been deforested, and another 17% is on several degradation several stages of degradation. So we really are very concerned, and I will say why. The Amazon, what is the role of the Amazon? Of course, the Amazon, let's say in the 1990s, the Amazon forest was removing more than 2 billion tons of carbon dioxide per year. And the Amazon not only was removing this large amount of carbon, but also carbon dioxide, but also the forest above ground, the carbon below ground. This is something between 150 and 200 billion tons of carbon. So this is one of the largest storage of carbon in the planet. Very important to maintain that carbon. If we lose all that carbon, it would increase more than 1 degree the temperature of the planet. So that's very, very important. But also, I want to highlight the Amazon forests, all tropical forests, but particularly the Amazon forest, play a lot of other ecosystem services. For instance, in addition to storing this huge amount of carbon, the forest recycles water so efficiently that the Amazon basin exports a lot of water vapor to the south of the Amazon, even to the Andes. So that's essential process for rainfall outside of the Amazon basin. The recycling of water also increases between 30 and 50% rainfall in the Amazon basin. This is the rainfall is 2.2, 2.3 meters of rainfall a year. There are very short dry season. It rains all year round. That climatic ecological interaction over tens of millions of years made the Amazon forest to be not only storing carbon, but the highest biodiversity in the planet. Also, the closed canopy represents that only a small percent of solar radiation reaches the forest floor, 4%. So it's not enough energy to evaporate all the soil water. So the soil is always very, very wet. All the vegetation, the litter, the trunks, they are very wet. And when, as you know, when vegetation is very wet, it's not flammable. When there is a lightning strike ignited fire in the Amazon forest, it only propagates for a few meters. It leads to the death of a few trees. So although, of course, in the tropics, there is a lot of lightning affecting the forest, but forest fires do not propagate. This is an ecological evolution over tens of millions of years. So, and also the forest produces a lot of microparticles, volatile organic compounds, and that they react, photochemical reaction in the atmosphere. These microparticles, they are yellow and they reflect solar radiation. So that also is a factor, ecosystem service for cooling also the Amazon forest. So I'm talking about all these ecosystems services. And of course, if we lose the Amazon forest, and the Amazon forest is very, very close to a tipping point. This is really a research I've been doing for a long time. 34 years ago, I published the first scientific article in Science showing that deforestation would lead the Amazon forest to the degraded open canopy ecosystem. It looks like tropical savannas, but much less carbon, much less biodiversity. So, and then, you know, there are many, many studies. I carried out also many studies showing the Amazon is very close to the tipping point of this quote-unquote savannization. because we are seeing all southern Amazon. This is 2.3 million square kilometers from the Atlantic all the way to the Bolivian Amazon forest. The dry season in that area is 4 to 5 weeks lengthier in 40 years, 1 week per decade. The dry season was 3 to 4 months. Now it's 4 to 5 months. In 2 to 3 more decades, if that continues, then the dry season reaches 5 to 6 months. It will be impossible to maintain the forest. And parts of southern Amazon, the forest has become a carbon source for more than 10 years. All of the Amazon is a carbon source because of deforestation, wildfires, degradation. So you have more carbon emitted than the forest removes. However, in portions of the southern Amazon, the forest has become a carbon source. So it shows the Amazon is very close to the tipping point. Therefore, we have to move towards land, we have to change the land use. And then basically, immediately, urgently, we have to reduce, to get to zero deforestation, degradation, wildfires, and all Amazonian countries are, fortunately, 2023 was the first year in 11 years with good news. Deforestation in all Amazonian countries reduced by about 55% compared to 2022. Also, we had a large number of wildfires, but that's because the Amazon basin had the record-breaking drought in 2023. The drought still continues. We are in the wet season in most of the southern eastern Amazon, but still it rains below average. So we had the record-breaking drought and many wildfires. And that the reason of this record-breaking drought was the fact that we had a strong El Nino phenomenon, equatorial Pacific, and also the North Atlantic Ocean was record-breaking warm. So when the tropical North Atlantic is very warm, induces drought in the Amazon. El Niños induce drought in the Amazon. So that's why we had the record-breaking drought 2023 and still continues this drought. So we have really to, as I said, to stop any degradation, deforestation, and wildfires in the Amazon. As I said, 2023, very good data. And we hope most Amazonian countries are committed, except Bolivia, Suriname, and Guyana, all the other Amazonian countries committed to get to zero deforestation before 2030. And I'm very optimistic that the countries will pursue and find that solution. So, as I said, particularly, I'm one of the many vast majority of climate scientists that we defend not exceeding 1.5 degrees of warming. As you know, 2023, how warm was 2023? Well, nobody predicted a few years back that we would have a very warm year. The temperature in 2023 was 1.49 degrees warmer than that average 1850, 1900. The hottest year, Copernicus, the institution in Europe, also declare if you want to go to see the planet as warm as 2023, you have to go back 125,000 years. You have to go back to the last interglacial period. And then, keep in mind that the temperature there, maximum temperature in the last interglacial, at that time, sea level was about 6 to 10 meters higher than today. Just to show, even if we keep this temperature of the planet 1.5 or reach 2 degrees, we have to expect in a few hundred years meters and meters of sea level rise. So that's why most climate scientists like myself, we really are saying, let's not go past 1.5 degrees. And for the Amazon, we know that many studies indicate, I've been involved in many studies, indicated the tipping point will be exceeded now with these two major drivers. One is global warming. Global warming is inducing severe droughts. We have had very severe droughts, 2005, 2010, 2015, 16, record-breaking drought, 2023, entering 2024. In less than 2 decades, 4 severe droughts. When we go back, we would have in the Amazon 1 severe drought every 2 decades. Now we have had 2 severe droughts per decade. So this is one big driver for this tipping point for the Amazon. And also the other big driver is deforestation. So just to give you one figure, the Amazon, as I said, the lowland in the Amazon, Brazilian Amazon, mostly Bolivia Amazon. So we had more than 20% of that area deforested and replaced mostly in the lowlands by pasture. Cattle ranches is the driver of 90% of the first deforestation in the Amazon. After several years, cattle ranchers usually sell the degraded pasture to soy farmers. So about 20% now of the Amazon, lowland Amazon, has been converted from cattle pastures to soy crops. And however, you know, the pasture is mostly, more than 50% is degraded, highly degraded. So the pasture does not evaporate and transpire much water during the dry season. Something very unique about the Amazon forest is, very few people know about that, but most of the Amazon forest, the evaporation, the transpiration is higher during the dry season. People say, well, dry season, how come? Because there is plenty of rain. The soils store a huge amount of water during the wet season, and then the rooting systems pump that water and bring to the leaves, and there is transpiration. And because during the dry season, there is a little bit less, so there is a little bit less clouds, more solar radiation, so there is more solar radiation to transpire the water. So, and that high transpiration during the dry season is one of the reasons why water recycling is very efficient, increases the rain in the dry season. So when you remove pastures in these lowlands in southern Amazon, they evaporate, transpire 1/3, 1/4 as much water during the dry season. So when you put together those two very severe, very frequent severe droughts and less recycling of water during the dry season, those are the reasons, the drivers why the dry season is becoming 1 week lengthier per decade. So this shows. So the Amazon forest is at the edge of this tipping point, and we have to stop it. And as I said, we have to look for nature-based solutions. The tipping point, many studies indicate if deforestation exceeds 20-25%, and that at the same time, global warming exceeds 2 to 2.5 degrees, that it would really exceed the tipping point. There is no way out. It's irreversible. Within 30 to 50 years, 50 to 70% of the Amazon forest would degrade into this degraded open canopy ecosystem. It would release more than 250 billion tons. So, as you know, the global warming has reached almost 1.5 degrees in an El Nino year, but World Meteorological Organization is indicating we may reach, in many studies, permanently 1.5 degrees by 2033. And with the current emission compromise of countries, the NDCs of all countries in the planet, we are going to reach 2.4 to 2.6 degrees by 2050. So forget it. I mean, if we reach that, it will exceed the tipping point. So we have to combat not to exceed 1.5, and then, as I said, to get zero deforestation, degradation, and fires. And so let me finish now. In a few minutes, I just want to try to tell you what would be solutions to avoid the disappearance, the tipping point of the Amazon forest. So we call nature-based solutions. Most of you, the investment world and the planet has a lot to do with the effective, urgent implementation of nature-based solutions. And there are two nature-based solutions. I want to finish by just highlighting the two of them. In addition, as I said, to get to zero deforestation, degradation, and wildfires, unfortunately, most of the deforestation in all of the Amazon is completely illegal, linked to organized crime in lowlands, mostly cattle ranches, land grabbing along the Andes, is also related to oil exploration and mostly illegal mining. And but what are nature-based solutions? Two. One, we released the Science Panel for the Amazon. I'm co-chair of that panel. We released during COP27 in Egypt a policy brief called Arcs of Restoration. So we need to restore not less than 50 million hectares of deforested, degraded areas. We call arcs because one is the southern arc from Atlantic to Bolivia, lowlands, and the second one is another highly deforested areas. This is along the Andes for 400 meters to 1,300 meters, just going up the Andes from Peru, Ecuador, and Colombia. That's the area with the highest biodiversity in the planet. Amazon has the highest biodiversity, and within the Amazon forest, that's the area. So we need really to do it. And so we need to give a scale to forest restoration. There has to be investments. Now it's very clear, just to give you one figure, the forest being reforested and restoring, we have to reforest a large area, highly deforested areas, but natural regeneration also takes place. And that reforestation removes something like 12 to 18 tons of carbon dioxide per year. So this volume for about 35 years has a tremendous potential in the carbon market. Today, very good numbers are coming out during the COP28. One forest restoration company called Monbeck announced selling $140 million to Microsoft, and the price of the carbon credit was $50 per credit for 1 ton of CO2. This is fantastic. This is much more than cattle, much more. This is even more than soy. So I'm just saying, and this is one ecosystem service. So forest restoration, and coincidentally, I'm here in Rio, and I'm here at the Brazil's Development Bank, BNDES, and during COP28, BNDES released the project called Arc of Restoration. BNDES is looking for investments. This is about $40 billion to restore 24 million hectares of the Brazilian Amazon from now to 2050. That will remove more than 12 billion tons of carbon dioxide, and it would really prevent the Amazon forest from reaching the tipping point. So this forest restoration. And then, of course, this is very important. Globally speaking, we need to restore 6, 7, 8 million square kilometers to remove a large amount of carbon dioxide to prevent the temperature to exceeding 2 degrees, 2.5 degrees. So this project in the Amazon is very important. And I finished by saying a second nature-based solutions, and this is also a big challenge to the investment world, is to create what we call a new economy. We call a social bioeconomy of healthy standing forests and flowing rivers. There are not a lot, but several cooperatives of agroecological systems. They produce more than 50 products of the Amazon biodiversity, and their profit, they hire many more people. For instance, these cooperatives, 100 hectares, they hire 10 to 20 employers. Cattle is 1 to 2 per 100 kilometers, and soy crops, this is 0.5 to 1 per 100 hectares. And these agroecological systems, they are much more profitable. $300 to $700 per hectare profits, soy, 200 to 300, cattle, $100. So we have to develop this new economy. The investment world has to invest a lot. We have to create global markets for the products of all tropical forest biodiversity. So I'll finish by now. I exceeded 30 minutes, sorry. But I want to say how important is for the investment world to come to support this new bioeconomy for all tropical forests, and in particular for the Amazon. And we are scientists trying to advance very quickly the ways to make use of hundreds of products from the Amazon forest. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Carlos. Thank you a lot. I mean, super interesting, all the powerful data. I mean, trying to remind all that data, it is hard, but thank you for sharing it. What struck me was the 70% of Amazon degradation, knowing that the Amazon is a 2.2 billion carbon dioxide remover. So that was super powerful. And thank you also for those 2 nature-based solutions. So moving from that data, also, I want to move to Caroline, who will also share with us, I mean, different kind of solutions that as investors we can do. So please, Caroline, the mic is yours. Thank you, Carlos.
Thank you, Liliana, and good morning, everyone. Let me just share my presentation with you. I hope you are seeing it. If you're not, just let me know.
We are seeing it. Perfect. Thank you, Caroline.
Good. Well, good morning. Thank you so much for the invitation. It's a pleasure to be here. I think Marco was already very generous in his introduction, but I'm just going to say that I am a lawyer. I have focused in the field of climate change law for more than 12 years, and I've worn several hats as a climate lawyer. Was a partner in a Brazilian law firm. I launched the Climate Change Lawyers Network in Latin America, and I've been providing legal advice to vulnerable countries in the UN Climate Convention negotiations. But more recently, I joined the Summary Capital team, as Michael already introduced as well, is a Brazilian asset manager with 30 years of work on the responsible investment agenda and with engagement with listed companies in Brazil. And FAMA is now launching a LATAM Climate Turnaround Fund, a fund that will invest in Latin America's, what we're calling the Latin America's carbon majors. In other words, the region's largest greenhouse gas emitters. And I'm going to talk a little bit about that very soon. But just to tell you that the purpose of this fund is to, as a shareholder, engage with the company to present concrete solutions and advice on how the company can navigate a decarbonization pathway reconciled with value creation and based on the best science. And then by doing this, we expect to help to promote a climate turnaround within the company. And we have the pleasure of having Professor Carlos Nobre actually as our main scientific advisor. So I'm very pleased to be here to share with you my perspective on these, mostly the legal context of climate litigation and the obligations that companies are facing in the context of the climate agenda. And of course, the role that investors play as well. I hope you find these useful. Well, we all know that transition to a low carbon economy requires both good governmental climate policies that will provide the necessary direction, the nudges, the incentives, and even the legal certainty for companies to take decarbonization pathways. But it also needs huge investments. And this is exactly what the United Nations Convention and the Paris Agreement say. And I don't want to repeat Professor Carlos Nobre, who put it very well, all the obligations the countries face under the Paris Agreement, and also the climate temperature target that we're not supposed to achieve. So we're aiming to avoid an increase in the global temperatures of 1.5 degrees based on the pre-industrial levels. But the Paris Agreement, I think it's good to start with understanding that the Paris Agreement actually requires governments to take measures to address climate change. And to fulfill these obligations, countries have to implement domestic policies to reduce their greenhouse gas emissions. And also, what the Paris Agreement does say explicitly is that the financial sector has a role to play. Actually, I don't want to say only the financial sector, but maybe everyone, pretty much everyone who owns money has to be in line with the objective of the Paris Agreement to make financial flows consistent with a pathway towards low greenhouse gas emissions and a climate resilient development. So this brings the private sector also on board to support governments on getting on track to avoid these increase in global temperatures. And well, this means in the end of the day that companies are going to increasingly face legal obligations, domestic legal obligations related to climate change. They are already facing these obligations. We are seeing this, and we know that there's more to come. We have plenty of examples, mostly coming from the European Union, but also from the United Kingdom and the US, obligations related to disclosure of information about climate change in terms of carbon emissions and all the also the linkage with deforestation activities. So also tracing the supply chain of these organizations to understand how they are contributing to emissions elsewhere as well. Information related to biodiversity too, and we know that linkages are very close with both the climate change and the biodiversity loss issues. So there is plenty of legislation already in place. There are carbon pricing legislations, carbon taxes, and carbon markets that are being designed in many jurisdictions around the world, and including in Latin America. We're also already seeing many jurisdictions here that already have carbon markets or a carbon tax, or are in the process to develop one. We have Brazil, we have Colombia. Brazil in the process of having one. Colombia already has one. Argentina has a carbon tax, and Chile as well, and Mexico with an emissions trading scheme. So this is just the beginning of a trend of how governments are going to increasingly establish carbon pricing instruments so that they can comply with their obligations under the Paris Agreement. And this is also a result of extraterritorial commercial restrictions. So not only legislation that is applied within these specific territories, but we're seeing legislation with transboundary effects. For instance, in the European Union, mostly, I think the European Union is the biggest example, but the UK is following through, and we're hearing about other jurisdictions that are probably going to follow suit in the future. Pretty much legislation taxing imports on carbon intense products. And these are products that are coming from developing nations, such as steel and fertilizers. And we're also seeing legislation that is willing to address issues with supply chains linked with deforestation in the Amazon region, in countries with that are suppliers of agricultural commodities, such as many in Latin America. So this has, of course, huge impacts to companies in these regions, and it's really controversial. There are, of course, countries are not happy about that, and companies within these countries are not happy about that, but this is happening. But we see that this is a slow process of governments actually being able to implement these policies. These are not easy conversations that governments can have within their constituencies. So we see that litigation is kind of filling the gaps of what governments can't do. And of course, and because governments are not pushing very hard on that, then companies are not doing more to avoid their emissions, to cut their emissions. And in addition to that, we're already seeing a lot of actual impacts of climate change. I think Professor Carlos Nobre put it very well, of course, but we can see that this applies worldwide in terms of actual extreme weather events, heat waves, and I'm not going to mention each of them, but this is becoming very real now, and that's of course why litigation becomes an option to address compensation for the damages that are being caused by the lack of action from those parties who should be preventing these emissions. We have more than 2,000 cases worldwide, and they are growing, of course. And while most cases in the beginning used to be more directed to governments, and especially because the Paris Agreement provided these legal grounds for these litigation actions to take place, now we are seeing a very robust trend of cases against corporations. They're picking pace, and many of them targeting as I mentioned, the carbon majors. What do I mean by carbon majors? I'm talking about mostly fossil fuels companies that are major historical greenhouse gas emitters. But this is this could be expanded to more than that. I'm going to talk about very soon. Just wanted to flag that these are really targets of many of the biggest litigation cases recently, and these are companies that are that of course are not going to cease to exist. Simply, they have major contributions in terms of the economic context within their inserted, but they will lead the planet to a very dangerous warming to human life in the next 10 years if they continue to operate with the same level of greenhouse gas emissions. So addressing the responsibility of these carbon majors and decarbonizing these carbon majors is clearly a priority in the fight against climate change, and we're seeing the courts reflect that. We have many cases ongoing, a few already trialed. The most famous of them is the case against Shell in the Netherlands, which actually resulted in Shell being obliged to cut its emissions in 45%. There was an actual ruling from a court that Shell should be reducing their emissions, regardless of what governments are actually doing in terms of climate policies and legal obligations. Courts are telling companies that they should be cutting their emissions. But this is also happening with other carbon majors in let's say in other sectors, not specifically related to the fossil fuels industry, because the reality is that there are also carbon majors in the supply chain of activities that cause deforestation, including producers of agricultural commodities and the livestock sector, and even financial institutions. So I think, as we heard from Professor Carlos Nobre, emissions from the land use sector are relevant as well. And while in most large economies, the most significant emissions come from the energy sector, in Latin America, the so-called AFOLU emissions are very significant. And in particular, in Brazil, they account for around 74% of emissions, agriculture and land use together. So that calls for concerns about how to address emissions in these sectors, and litigation is already looking to address that. We've been seeing many cases being filed. They haven't been trialed already, but they are there, and we don't know the outcomes, but they are picking up pace, and it seems that there's more to come. But also cases being filed in Latin America, in the region, and in fact, Brazil is the fifth country in jurisdiction in the world in numbers of climate litigation lawsuits. There are more than, I think today, the latest account of climate litigation cases in Brazil was around 80 cases. But then today, I read an article in a famous Brazilian newspaper that the federal government is suing farmers for their, in terms of their deforestation, illegal deforestation, but they're suing farmers on the basis of the damages that their illegal deforestation emissions caused to the atmosphere. So this is a loss and damage lawsuit, actually a package with more than 300 lawsuits that are seeking to hold farmers accountable, big farmers accountable for their deforestation linked emissions in Brazil. So this is huge. It really means that there's going to be climate litigation associated with deforestation in Latin America, and not only transnational litigation that are filed in the country, in the supply chain elsewhere in other developed countries, but also in the region. Well, now that I've told you a lot about climate litigation, I just like to express my personal views about how this process has been affecting the COP negotiations, the Paris Agreement decision-making process. I think, as Professor Carlos Nobre mentioned, there's a lot going on in the Paris Agreement implementation stage. COPs are becoming very hectic and busy, and people are interested in attending COPs. And I believe that this is also because of all the noise that climate litigation has been putting on out there, and because there are decisions that come out from this process, from the COP processes, that can affect litigation, that can provide the basis for further litigation and for these litigations, even against corporations and against governments, to continue. And we are seeing that decisions related to compensation for loss and damages in the negotiations, that they are happening. This wouldn't be true a couple of years ago. This was a forbidden topic, was very contentious, because developed countries were very concerned that they would be given a precedent for by allowing a loss and damage fund to be created under the Paris Agreement, under the UNFCCC. They would be providing a precedent for more litigation to come elsewhere. But I think they realize that it's better to have this sorted here at the Paris Agreement, to have a mechanism to address these claims, than to have this in the courts out there in a very chaotic way, affecting companies and businesses and governments with a lot of legal uncertainty. So we're seeing this reflect in the COP decisions. This is my personal view. But still, there's not much more that can be done in this context at the COPs, in this context of the Paris Agreement. This is not an issue that belongs exclusively to governments and to countries. We now, I think we can really understand how complex it is to have agreements being reached by 196 countries. So now that we are following the negotiations, we had almost 100,000 people in Dubai. So we understand how complex the process of having consensus among so many governments is very difficult. And at the same time, we do see that many of those issues can be addressed by other parties, by non-state actors, by the private sector, by financial institutions, by investors too. And the decision at COP28 recognized that very explicitly. It called on all these actors to support in various aspects of the implementation of the Paris Agreement, especially in terms of financing decarbonization pathways. So I think this was an important call for us all to understand that we cannot really rely exclusively on these decisions, on governments to take over and drive this change. So as I said, we need companies to play a leading role here. We can't wait for legislation, government action, litigation, COP decisions. These are all, of course, very important drivers, and they will, at some point, bring about radical transformation. At some point, this is what happens with the revolutions, right? But they are slow and they are unstable, and we don't have time, I think, as Professor Carlos Nobre made very clear. But at the same time, we know that companies will not do this without the proper incentives and nudges. So that's why we need investors to take action. We need investors who are actively engaged to help bring about this transformation, to be instrumental in this process within these companies through stewardship and engagement, and really help companies navigate this new world, which is very complex as well. We're seeing how difficult it is to put forward just climate transition plans, and all the issues with greenwashing, and whether you can use carbon offsets to compensate your emissions and become carbon neutral or not, a net zero or not. So this is not an easy journey, and companies are facing litigation for that as well. So I think this is a call also for investors, the investors here in this room, to understand how important it is to have your active engagement with investees. And this is particularly my mission with the carbon majors in Latin America, with that Latin Climate Turnaround Fund I mentioned in the beginning of the presentation. So our focus is really on companies that are responsible for these large volumes of greenhouse gas emissions in the region, and including in the land use and agriculture sector, and to create actually a transformation and a turnaround in these carbon majors to make an impact in the way we can address the 1.5 challenge that Professor Carlos Nobre put very strongly. So we need to decarbonize these major emitters, and we need investors to help them to that direction. I'm going to end here. Thank you so much. I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Caroline. Super interesting as well. So I have seen right now we have some couple of minutes. Thank you, Professor Carlos, because you answer a lot of the questions. You're great. So I think all those questions were responded. I don't know, Marco, maybe to close the session right now, we can kind of come back with Caroline and Professor Carlos to have a kind of big perspective on what can be the role of investors as well.
Yeah. So I think, maybe as an overarching question, both to Carlos and Caroline, would be, most of us here are impact investors. So what concrete actions could we take? And I think this is a question that bifurcates into directions. One direction would be, how can we invest in solutions, which is what Carlos brought, reforestation, bioeconomy and whatnot. And then on Caroline's side, I would be interested to understand, how can we engage with big emitters in Brazil? Because, financial markets regulations in the US and Europe are much more favorable for shareholder activism. And in Brazil, that's much harder if you don't have controlling positions. So I would like to hear from you as well, Carol, what's your experience and what kind of activism gets to positive results? Carlos, maybe if you want to give some words
sorry.
on the. Go ahead.
So sorry, I may not have listened. What did you ask me? Sorry.
So no, yeah. So what do you see as concrete actions we could take as investors to, on reforestation, on developing the bioeconomy that you were talking about? What would be your suggestions like for actionable steps that this group could take?
Yes, for sure. I think, again, it's interesting, the investment world, as I mentioned, the figures are this new bioeconomy in the Amazon has a tremendous potential, economic potential, social potential, improves the livelihoods of millions of people. So, however, we are very short of investments. This is analogous to the fossil fuel sector, energy sector. At COP28, it became clear. It was revealed that the subsidies and investments in the fossil fuel industry globally, $7.2 trillion a year, and investments on the renewable energy, solar, wind, and many other renewable energies is 500 billion. Look at the difference. So, when you look also investments for the global investors, the financial sector in cattle ranches in the Amazon is much, much more than investments in this new bioeconomy. So I would really put this as a challenge. It's analogous to fossil fuel. It's a challenge because in most of the world, also for renewable energy, like in all tropical countries, renewable energy today is much cheaper. In Brazil, solar wind energy is 1/3 as expensive as natural gas fire power plants. So why not having much bigger scale? In my understanding, it makes sense. I'm not an economist. Makes sense economically. So I would say that's the way. It's essential for the investment world for combating the climate emergency in the fossil fuel industry, but also in terms of protecting all the forests, the biodiversity, and also creating this new bioeconomy. So I would say investment world is essential to do. And I just want to make one small comment. I really like Carolina's information, and I'm pretty much sure that the judicial world will eventually start putting a lot of damage to investments that affect the climate emergency. I'm pretty positive, optimistic that at one point the judicial world will say no more fossil fuel, prohibit, no more, no more deforestation, all those things. I really like what Carolina was showing, but I'm optimistic that the judicial system will really advance very, very rapidly.
Thank you, Professor Carlos. And thank you, Marco. You were completely right. As you said, Brazil is really different in terms of our legislation and how our capital markets work, how mature they are, and the fact that companies have a controlling shareholder most of the time. It's not as fragmented as in the US, for instance. So here we really believe that, and I believe that engagement with companies is the way forward to make this persuasion from within the company. I was an advisor, a legal advisor to these companies for all my career, and I know that when you provide good advice, companies listen. But as a service provider, I would give this advice once, and then I would, be released from my engagement. But I think it's different when you are an investor and you're committing committed with engaging continuously with the company for that purpose. And of course, you have a different status as a shareholder, and you'll be much more welcomed in this situation. And I think we see that the approach with emerging markets is quite different as well. I mentioned here a few cases that were brought by Client Earth, which is a kind of an environmental law firm in the UK. So Client Earth most of the times file cases in the UK or in European courts, but very rarely in developing countries themselves. So they have a different approach, understanding that these emerging economies, they need to be approached with engagement, with capacity building, with support to strengthen domestic policies rather than going to courts. So I understand that having an engagement with companies in Brazil, with these carbon majors in Brazil and Latin America, as a way to prevent litigation is actually adds a lot of value to their strategies in terms of their decarbonization pathway, and of course, and then there are a lot of as I said, complexities in going navigating these decarbonization pathways in terms of assessing the legal risks and all the transition risks, and also the opportunities. So I think the more support these companies can have in addressing these pathways is even better for everyone, to make sure that they are going to decarbonize the right way without greenwashing, you know, and in a substantial with a substantial strategy.
Great. So we are super on time. I don't know, Marco, if you have any other additional comment before we close the session, but thank you both. I mean, thank you both for bringing this reflection, bringing this specific opportunities, and thank you for that. So we are excited. Everyone who has kind of more questions or ideas, I mean, please feel free to reach out, I mean, to the impact team, Marco, I don't know, and then we can follow up with Caroline and Carlos, Professor Carlos. So thank you for that. And yeah, I mean, Marco, something else?
No, I'm done here. Thank you so much, Carlos. Thank you so much, Carol. It's a pleasure to hear your thoughts.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Bye-bye. Have a nice day.
Bye-bye.